Hello and welcome to Season 8 of Movies and Tea. I'm your host, always, Edward Jones, and joining me, of course, is my co-host, Miss Kim Lowe.
Hello.
Tonight on season, as I said, we are kicking off Season 8 and taking a break once again from our usual format of director filmography breakdowns, as we've instead decided to indulge our love of the creature feature, or more precisely, the natural horror movie. As regular listeners will know, that every season that we celebrate with a shark movie, and we thought, wow, there's so many other animal attack movies out there that we just don't get to cover because they don't fall under the shark movie bracket. So why don't we just sit down and put together a whole history of the natural horror movie or the creature feature, depending on which school of thought you belong to. And that's exactly what we've done. So over the course of this season, we're going to be taking a look at the history of these movies as we chart them from tonight's film, which is the 1954 B-movie classic Them, right through to present day over the course of the films that we selected for this season. But Kim, I mean, for yourself, what is the appeal of the creature feature, or again, natural horror? But we're just going to call them creature feature for argument's sake now. So
I've always liked creature features. I think that they're just fun movies to watch. Like, there's a little bit of tension, and then sometimes there's a little bit of fun. It's a bit of a lot of films are a bit campy, and I don't know. I just think they're very enjoyable, especially once you bring in all types of different animals and whatnot. It really brings up this whole different appeal, I guess, because every creature that is getting you is going to be different, whether it's a spider or, in this case, giant ants, or when we talk about the most basic is sharks or alligators or that sort of thing. Anything like that, you can, the sky is the imagination at this point, right? There's so many animals that haven't been used, and I guess, if you want a variety, that would be Zoo as a TV series would bring you a ton of different animals.
Yeah.
But,
I'm still going to watch that. I only ever watched the first ever episode, and then I had to stop watching for whatever reason, so.
Yeah, no, the show is pretty good, I think. By the time you get to, they really build a good foundation in the first season, and once you get into the second season, that's when you really feel like the characters are established and the scenario established, and then the situation gets a little bit more dire type of thing.
Yeah,
so it's fairly good. A lot of the characters that are actually a lot of the cast they're actually gotten to. I've seen them in other things. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah. Well, definitely, with the creature feature, it does tap into that sort of primal fear, really, because we're very sort of like to think we ourselves sit very sort of comfortable on top of the food chain, and then we obviously look at nature and how horrific it is, and then the creature feature just essentially makes it somehow even more horrific by just really sort of tapping into that primal fear of these things that we fear in everyday life. What if they were intentionally going after us? And often we see them, the visions of these creatures being twisted, and certainly in the case of tonight's movie, the ants in this one obviously being grown to supersize because of nuclear testing in the Nevada desert. With the history of these movies, we could obviously go all the way back to the original King Kong movies and The Lost World, but we decided to start with 1954's Them, a black and white sci-fi monster movie, and really the first of the nuclear monster movies. From this, we obviously saw things such like Tarantula, we saw things like the giant leeches. There was all kinds of weird and wonderful sort of monsters being grown to supersize and then feeding on the local population that sort of followed in its wake. And Them, for whatever reason, always was one of those movies that sort of stuck with me, and I think because it's one of those B movies that manages to rise above what many people expected of it, because this is a movie about giant ants that steal sugar. But if you're not obviously aware of the film already, as I said, this was released in 1954 and sees a young girl being discovered in the desert, and she's basically in shock, and she's catatonic, she can't talk, and when she does, all she can scream is "them!" And while investigating, an FBI agent named Ellison basically discovers that the ants have grown to supersize because of the nuclear testing in the area. And not only that, they're also somehow migrated into the LA storm drains as we build to the flamethrower-clad finale of this movie. But the film itself was directed by Gordon Douglas, who had a career which spanned really 5 decades. I mean, it's a career which runs all the way from 1935 with Inferno Triangle and Lucky Beginners and goes right through until 1977 with Viva Knievel, with his last game also including amongst his last films including The Detective with Frank Sinatra, which would of course be the prequel in many ways to Die Hard. Sinatra, even under his contract because he did The Detective, had to legally be offered the role of John McClane in Die Hard, even though he was really pushing it in the age stakes when they decided to go make that movie. So with them, it's, as I said, it's a giant ant B movie, but at the same time it's got a lot of charm to it. It was also going to be like one of the first films shot in 3D, but the rigs never worked, so there's elements of 3D in it which don't make a huge amount of sense because it was never released on 3D. But I think despite these issues, it's still a film that manages to rise well above its rather campy plot. But what do you think of this one, Kim?
I mean, it is a really good... I personally thought it was really fun to watch. Put aside the black and white and put aside the giant ants and the quirky, the campy effects because of, obviously age. It's still, I actually thought the ants were too scary. They were more cute. They look so fuzzy and adorable.
Flamethrower them to death.
For an ant movie, it sounds, when you talk about giant ants, it sounds so preposterous because no one expects ants to be dangerous or whatnot. And in reality, the ants here aren't exactly, they are dangerous because, they will inject you with formic acid, and that's how it kills its prey in this one. But I think it's such a... It's so interesting to watch how they're fighting them and tracking them down, and it's just by all the little points they have of how do you find the next nest and the unusual events of what are being reported of missing persons and missing sugar and sweets and stuff like that. And you just find it so funny because you're tracking these insects basically that you never expect to be, they're more, if anything, ants are kind of pests because if they're too many or if they enter your house or whatever, then it becomes a problem. But most days we don't sit around thinking ants are going to come and kill us,
No, ants are just more a scourge of a picnic than a sort of something that we sort of fear for on our day-to-day life. I mean, especially over where we are obviously based, because we don't have to worry about bull ants. Like in Africa, where you have these killer ants whose bites worse than a bullet wound and stuff. We just have just standard black ants, which are just, as I said, just a pain in the ass, but not something that can really sort of stand up to a magnifying glass or a kettle, which obviously isn't going to be much use on these guys because they're gigantic. Because as we all know, in the 1950s, radiation makes everything a lot bigger. That's all you need to know. If there's radiation involved, it's going to make everything supersized. That's the general consensus from these movies to Tarantula to Godzilla. It's all explained away with nuclear radiation because that was our grasp on nuclear testing.
But I mean, when you think about the movie, it's pretty good because it is set in, they do move around. So you do have that initial setting of being in the New Mexico desert. And then it moves forward to afterwards as they track the ants migrating to the LA storm drains. And I think that, the contrast of the two areas is pretty nice too. I think the ending is a bit quick. The ending is wrapped up pretty fast, but I mean it's also pretty good because the ants themselves don't really have a lot of tricks up their sleeves. You know, it's not like, you know, shark movies or whatever where, oh, they're gonna pop out of nowhere. You know, these guys are super loud. They have like this call, and then you know where they are, and you know. So they're not exactly like sly creatures. You kind of have an idea of where they are, and that. And I think, you know, that's where it more, most of the movie, I think, is spent on tracking them than anything, and just talking to the people, but it still keeps a pretty good pacing.
Yeah, I mean, the noise that these ants make is basically the call of bird-voiced tree frogs, and they mixed in with some just like general bird sounds like the wood thrush, the hooded warbler, and the red-bedded woodpecker. Thank you, Wikipedia, for that one. I'm not sitting there like going, "Oh, that's a warbler," but it's really grating. I have to say, this high pitch sort of ringing that they use as the ants sort of calling, which, despite being like these huge ants, nobody apparently can like see them. Like, they're just always somehow hiding behind a giant sand dune or something. But yeah, it's an interesting take, and certainly when we get the big reveal of like the ant coming over the sand dune, it's pretty exciting. Especially because, you know, we're here with a group of heroes who are just all about leaping into action at any given moment. There's none of this usual cliches that we have with like movies of this period, where you have like forced love stories and the female characters are sort of damsels in distress, and we get none of that here. There's just like people like, oh, there's a giant ant, let's gun it down. And we have Joan Whedon as Dr. Pat Medford, who I think the worst that happens is the fact that you have a couple of characters making like the usual sexist remark of, oh, I wish I got sick so she could look after me. But frankly, she's not. She's there to contribute more than just for be someone for guys to hit on. So
yeah. And
we also get Edmund Gwynn as the bumbling Harold Medford, her father, who's provides a lot of the comedic moments of this film. There's a great moment where they're trying to get him to use the radio, and he's all like, well, why do I have to do it this way? They know who I am.
They know I'm done talking. You know, why?
Yeah, exactly. And he also provides that wonderful 10 minutes of natural history filler, because we need to move from one location to the other, but we haven't got a lot of budget to do it, so we get a 10-minute history lesson on how ants work. But yeah, I totally agree with you what you're saying about the transition between locations, because obviously in the desert we go into like the ant tunnels, which is fun, and then we go into the urban setting, and obviously they're using the storm drains like the new ant tunnels, which is, I thought, of a really good switch up, rather than them just doing more tunnels in LA, that we use the storm drains, because aesthetically it just looks really cool, and especially when you throw in the element of the fact that you got the army pursuing them with like flamethrowers, it just makes it just this perfect finale. And you throw in the two stupid kids that have somehow wandered into the storm drain for whatever reason. I don't know why.
Well, no, I mean their father got attacked, so their father got attacked, and then they ran into hide. That's the basic concept of what happened.
I just must have blanked out because I heard stupid kids, and I was like, always in the way. It's like we had all this plan just to like pour gasoline into the sewers. It's like, no, you got to go in and rescue these kids now.
But, you know, talking about the migration part, there was one part that I thought was pretty interesting, and I don't know if they meant to do it in some way, or maybe at least my mind kind of wandered to that. Was when they were kind of charting the stuff, and then they had that freighter in Pacific Ocean, and it was like heading towards Asia or something. And I thought it was so funny, because I was like, these are winged ants, because they're queens. So
yes.
So you think about it, and I was like, wow, these are giant whatever. Are they trying to give a nod to, you know, was it Mothra? Is that the name?
Yeah, the giant moth.
Yeah.
This actually came before Mothra. I mean, so maybe Mothra took inspiration from them in many ways. Because, I mean, obviously Godzilla is around this sort of period. I mean, a couple of years before this, you had the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, which obviously provides the big inspiration for Godzilla. And also, like, a film that inspired them to shoot this on widescreen, but it was never actually shown anywhere in widescreen, so that was a waste of time as well. Although it's interesting when you watch the DVD release, they've actually cleaned up some of the footage to like hide some of the goofs where you see like the mechanical workings of some of the ants. This is like one of those, because normally when you watch anything on like DVD and certainly Blu-ray, you end up noticing all the things that like VHS gives you a bit of leeway with, gives you that bit of blurring. So all the wires and stuff that you normally see on like when you get a nice Blu-ray release. With them, it's probably one of those rare occasions where they've corrected the film to hide the goofs. So.
Oh, okay. I don't know. I watched a digital version, so it wasn't the.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't feel like there was anything too obvious in terms of mechanical, but I mean, I wasn't really looking for it either, because I feel like when you watch movies now and you watch like, especially like creature features and stuff like that, you really need to be a little bit more forgiving, because back then technology is not like now and it's not in CGI, so a lot of this thing is given. As long as it looks kind of like it and kind of acts kind of like it, I think then basically it's passable. It's believable enough to I mean, you're talking about giant ants, you and you have to believe that radiation makes everything bigger. So it's already like a stretch of imagination in many ways.
I mean, I love the ant effects in this. They're very charming, especially at this sort of period. I mean, they don't do much. They sort of like lumber forward and occasionally they grab somebody. So there's a lot of like heavy lifting carried by the human cast here to sort of like really sort of sell the idea that they're this threat rather than just, as you put it, adorable ants. I have to say on the poster they look a lot more threatening because they've got the cat eyes, but they got just the normal eyes when you see them in the film. So, but the actual the characters and that. I mean, how did you find the sort of cast here? I mean, because it seems that everyone sort of has a role for a change rather than just being in it to fulfill a criteria, as in the love interest, the bumbling professor. Everyone seemed to bring something to this operation, which I liked, even though the professor's a bit all over the place, should we say? A little shell-shocked. It's just it amused me when they go out into the desert and they got the goggles and he's got them around his neck and he's like, oh yeah, you got to put them over your eyes, and then he's like, oh wow, that's so much better. I'm thinking, we really want to question your credentials if you don't know how goggles work and you're a professor. So
he's an old-fashioned professor. He didn't have goggles back then, I would say. I guess. Yeah. Or it's to show his age, right? Because the daughter keeps emphasizing on his age and he can't do certain things and that sort of stuff. And that's why she insists on doing a lot of this stuff, because she has the professional criteria to be able to help them get through that. And obviously in these type of situations you always have the FBI agent you always have some agent who's really just and in this case the FBI agent who has a fancy to her and is always by her side, like always.
Of course, in case you might need something. It's not as bad as like when you look at It Came From Beneath the Sea, where you've got like the two guys who are basically constantly either side of the one female leads, and it's all like this weird threesome that's constantly going on. It's like, we couldn't draft in another female actor for you guys, or maybe just like not try and hump over the female cast member.
No, but I mean, it is though. I mean, like in this case, it actually is done really smoothly, because you do like kind of see the connection that these two are having throughout the movie, because it is set over, I think like over a few months between like them tracking it from one location to the next. But it's not like the romance is not the central focus, and it's not even, it's only like hinted at through a bit of their actions and a bit of their interactions. But a lot of it is still very professional. It's very, like down to business on getting this stuff done. And that's it. And I kind of like that, because, they're really focused on the film itself being like the story itself of these ants, and this being the main thing that they're trying to attack. And, in some ways I actually find it kind of funny is when they had to do the whole press conference. And I thought it was so funny, because I was like, I wonder what press would do when you start telling them, yeah, we have a crisis. We're setting in martial law, for the city because of this, and it's because of giant ants.
Well, did you see that
Sounds
the
so goofy.
board there that they have in the press office, and it's sort of like the things they're supposed to be looking out for, and it's like flying saucers, unusual smells.
Yeah.
It's like, what sort of person would point unusual smells? But yeah, I wish I'd screenshotted that particular book, because it just amused me so much when I saw that. And the fact that they have a stamp for unidentified flying object.
I know, and it's so great because I love that part where there's this guy who witnesses the stuff and he gets sent to the loony bin, and then you go and then they go in, have a chat with him, and then they kind of just like, yeah, keep him in there. We don't want him talking.
James Whitmore, who plays the police sergeant in this, actually wore lifts in his shoes to compensate between the hype between himself and James Harness. He also would employ bits of business, where he would basically do various hand gestures and motions during the scenes he appeared, just so he could draw more attention to his character when he wasn't speaking. This film is also noteworthy for the use of the Wilhelm scream, which is that sort of high-pitched scream you normally hear when characters like fall or get attacked. And that had only been introduced 3 years earlier in the film Distant Drums, where it was used during the action sequence. And here we see the scene where the sailor on the freighter is grabbed by the ant. When Whitmore's character is also grabbed by the ant's mandibles as well, we also hear it there as well. So I love hearing that scream whenever it appears, and it's just so funny to think that like it goes all the way back to like 1950 and we're still using the same sound effect like all these years later. Much like canned laughter. The fact that you think those audiences are now dead. That's the laughter of dead people. So I mean, I was glad that you enjoyed this. I wasn't sure which way it was going to go, because either you think, God, this is bloody unbearable and stupid, or you'd enjoy it. Because I did say to you, like, when we come to do this is like the perfect movie for like a rainy Sunday afternoon for myself. This is,
and it was a rainy Sunday afternoon that I watched it.
It worked out great then. Yeah, it's fun. I mean, it does say it's real quick, because obviously it's a 1950s movie. They didn't really make epics back then, because people had other stuff to do. So the 94 minutes is really brief, and it never overstays its welcome or creates itself bogged down with unnecessary plot, in which a lot of these movies do. They normally have some stupid B plot that's going on, or a very ropey monster that will often fail to live up to the promise of the amazing posters. So I think this is like one of the few occasions where the poster is just about right for this movie. It's not promising anything it doesn't really deliver. So
yeah, for sure. I mean, there's the movie itself is I think that's the main thing. I think you really nailed it. It really doesn't waste its time on anything else. It really just focuses on what's the plot here, the ants, how to get rid of them, how to track them. And in between, it's also really fun because, you don't really think it's very scary overall, and they embrace it by adding a lot of extra humor into it. So little bits of humor here and there, and that keeps it pretty engaging and, pretty lighthearted overall. I actually think, as a creature feature, this is probably the least scary experience that I've had. But then, you think about it, and, if it was technology right now, or the minds of right now, how would they do a giant ant movie, right? Maybe it exists out there, but I don't know. I don't sit around looking up, indie creature features every day. But I mean, I sometimes think about that on like what other things people can come up with that seems basically harmless, but add a sense of danger to it. So.
Yeah, I know what you mean. The problem is that we've now gone the opposite direction. I mean, obviously with this film, it's all practical effects. So these creatures have got a real sort of presence to them. Yes, they might not be the scariest of creatures, it has to be said, but at the same time, there's a real charm to them. And if you look at now where we've got like Lava Tarantula or any of the numerous shark movies that the Asylum put out, and it's all that horrible CGI. And you just kind of long for just to see something with the presence that this film has. So, but I just think the film has a lot of charm. It's got its downfalls because of time having passed on, but I think the plotting of the film is solid enough just to still make it a fun time. So, but if you want to watch more killer ant movies, there are actually quite a few. Released the same year, you got The Naked Jungle, which featured army ants threatening a plantation. They're not giant, but they got superior numbers on their side. Then in 1974, you've got Phase 4, which is about super intelligent ants gaining intelligence through atomic rays, and then plotting to take over the world. And that then leads us into Empire of the Ants, which is not smart ants, but just really giant mutated ants in 1977. And also that year, we also had It Happened at Lakewood Manor as well, which features killer ants. So, surprisingly, they have clocked in a few appearances on the creature feature list. Not as many as obviously like sharks, but they're definitely beating up bees.
Bees would be a really good one.
Well, yeah, bees.
Granted, bees in general are already kind of a threat. So a lot of people, I guess, if you think about movies and it already has this kind of like horrific type of element to it. So how would you work bees into
I think bees, wasps, anything that sort of buzzing stinginess is just pretty horrific. We've all been stung by like a bee at some point in our lives, so you have that mental sort of trauma to work off, really. And I think just the idea of this swarm coming at you, and yes, when we look at like the killer bee movies, and it's things like The Swarm, which is just horrible. Although Wasp, I think, fares slightly better. You got Stung in from 2015, which had like large mutant wasp, which was pretty fun, gooey fun.
Ah, okay.
But yeah, there's a lot of TV movies with killer bees, like Deadly Invasion, which I remember being really excited for randomly on a Saturday night. But then again, I only had 4 channels growing up as a kid, so that brings us to the end of tonight's episode. Thank you very much, as always, for listening. If you haven't done already, please do hit the like and subscribe button, and let us know what your favourite creature features are. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and we're also on Instagram as well. And as I said, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button wherever you happen to be listening to us. You can also check out our full archive of episodes at our blog, which is moviesandteapodcast.wordpress.com as well, which has got all previous 7 seasons of our show, as well as our Friday Film Club, where every Friday myself and Kim come together to pick a film each to highlight. Sometimes it's a theme, sometimes it's not. Either way, it's a chance for us to talk about more of the movies that we love. But Kim, where does our history of the creature feature take us to next?
Yeah, the next place that we're going is going to be 1963, and it's going to be Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds.
Yes, Alfred Hitchcock takes a rare diversion into making his own memorable creature feature as he gives us killer birds, tapping into his own very real fear of birds. But we'll be talking about that obviously more on our next episode, so hope you can join us. But until then, thank you as always for listening. Thanks to my host Kim, and we will be back next time to talk about Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds. But until then, good night.